So, we all do it, don't we? Almost automatically. That little shake of the salt shaker while you're cooking, maybe another sprinkle at the table. It's just, well, part of the routine. But what if changing that one tiny everyday habit held surprising power over your long-term health? We're talking about the obvious, your heart, but also something you might not expect, your brain. Today, we're taking a deep dive into an article that explores exactly this connection, specifically titled Salt Swaps for Heart and Brain Health. Our goal is to kind of unpack the research linking how much salt we eat to blood pressure, heart problems, and this really emerging link to cognitive function later in life. And we'll zero in on a really practical, low-cost tool the research highlights, potassium-based salt substitutes. We're going to guide you through the core findings and what they could mean for you.
Yeah, what's fascinating about this stuff is how something as common as, kitchen salt connects directly to some of the biggest health challenges people face today.
Absolutely. And the starting point for this research is something many of us know about, but maybe don't fully grasp the danger of: high blood pressure.
That's right. Hypertension, or high blood pressure, is a leading cause of major health events. We're talking strokes, heart attacks, kidney disease. It's earned that nickname silent killer for a good reason, often. There are just no symptoms you can feel until, well, serious damage has already started to happen.
And this is where the material takes a really interesting turn, doesn't it? Highlighting a crucial link that goes beyond just your heart and kidneys.
Yes, exactly. This is the emerging connection researchers are really emphasizing now. The relationship between having high blood pressure in midlife, say, your 40s, 50s, 60s, and a significantly higher risk of cognitive decline, and especially vascular dementia further down the line. Studies are consistently reinforcing this pattern.
So how does high pressure in your blood vessels, back in midlife, potentially end up damaging your brain decades later? What's the mechanism?
Well, the proposed reasons are quite logical when you think about the brain's delicate vascular system. High sustained pressure can actually damage the small, intricate blood vessels within the brain itself. This can lead to chronic low-grade inflammation, cause what's known as oxidative stress. You can kind of think of it like cellular rust, and even compromise the blood-brain barrier, which is like the brain's protective filter, potentially letting harmful stuff from the bloodstream get in. All of these processes can, cumulatively impair brain function over time.
Okay, but it's important to add some nuance here, right? As the research does, lowering blood pressure isn't the only factor for cognitive health. It's not like a guarantee against all types of dementia.
Exactly right. Blood pressure management is one vital piece, but it's part of a much larger puzzle for keeping your brain healthy. Reducing high blood pressure doesn't prevent all cognitive decline, but the evidence strongly suggests it can help reduce the risk, particularly for vascular dementia, which is specifically tied to blood flow and vessel health in the brain. It's about, tackling a major risk factor that you can actually influence.
Which naturally brings us right back to salt. We know that eating too much sodium is a primary driver of high blood pressure for a lot of people.
Precisely. And the bulk of that sodium isn't just from the salt shaker you use at the table. A huge amount comes hidden in processed foods. Plus, of course, the salt we do add during cooking and eating. Cutting back entirely on sodium is, frankly, incredibly difficult for most people because our taste buds just get so used to it.
Right. So if just cutting way back is hard, what's the alternative the research points towards? This is where these potassium chloride-based salt substitutes come into play.
This is the practical solution this material really focuses on. These products work by replacing a significant chunk of the sodium chloride that's just regular table salt with potassium chloride. And potassium is a mineral that's beneficial anyway. It's important for heart rhythm, fluid balance. Crucially, it also seems to help relax blood vessels and counteract some of sodium's negative effects on blood pressure.
And the case for using these substitutes is really backed up by some pretty significant research, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's one major study the article highlights.
Yes, the SALT study. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 2021, and it really is a landmark trial. It involved over 20,000 participants in China and specifically tested a salt substitute where about 25–30% of the sodium chloride was swapped out for potassium chloride.
Okay, a huge study. So what did they find? What were the key results?
The results were quite impactful, actually. The group using the salt substitute saw a modest but clinically meaningful average drop in systolic blood pressure. That's the top number when you get it measured by about 3 to 4 millimeter Hg. But the really striking findings were the reductions in actual health events over the years they followed up. They observed a 14% reduction in strokes, a 13% reduction in major cardiovascular events like heart attacks, and even a 12% reduction in deaths from any cause.
Wow. This is some pretty big numbers for what seems like such a simple change in the kitchen.
They really are significant. Now, it's worth putting it in context. The people in that study had a very high baseline sodium intake to begin with, considerably higher than the average intake in, say, the UK or the US. So while the absolute impact might vary depending on your starting point, the study still provides really compelling evidence of the potential benefits of this swap, especially as part of a broader dietary approach, and particularly for people who know they eat a lot of salt or already have blood pressure concerns.
Okay, so let's get practical then. If someone listening is thinking about trying this, what are these substitutes actually like? Taste, availability, cost.
Right. So the commercial salt substitutes you typically find, say in UK supermarkets, contain around 75% sodium chloride, and the remaining 25-30% is that potassium chloride. Now, taste. Some people do notice a slight difference. It's sometimes described as a bit metallic or slightly bitter, particularly if you just sprinkle it on food cold or use a really large amount.
Yeah, I've heard that concern before. People worry it won't taste the same.
It's a common initial reaction, definitely. But what's interesting is that taste preferences often adjust over time. It's quite adaptable. And many people find the difference is barely noticeable or it completely disappears when the substitute is actually used during the cooking process. So it gets integrated into the dish rather than just shaken on top at the end.
Okay, and are they easy to find? Or are they like a specialty health food store item?
Oh, not at all. They're widely available now. You can find them in most big supermarkets. Tesco, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, for example, and definitely through online retailers, too. They might be slightly more expensive than just plain table salt if you compare them ounce for ounce, but they're still very affordable, and a typical container lasts quite a long time.
So they're accessible. The taste thing is manageable for most, especially in cooking. But this brings us to a really critical point. How much should people use, and crucially, who absolutely must avoid them?
This is essential information, really vital. Even when you're using a substitute, the overall principle is still less is more. We need to remember that. The NHS recommends adults shouldn't consume more than 6 grams of salt per day, which works out to about 2.4 grams of sodium. But, and this is key, that's a maximum limit. It's not a target to aim for. And it includes all the sodium in the food you eat, with processed foods being a huge hidden source for most of us.
Right, so the substitute helps manage the salt you add, but it doesn't magically cancel out the sodium that's already in that packet of crisps or that ready meal you bought.
Exactly. You should think of the salt substitute as a helpful tool to use alongside broader dietary changes. That really means prioritizing whole, unprocessed foods, cooking from scratch more often whenever you can, and getting into the habit of actually checking food labels for sodium content. It can be surprisingly high.
Yeah.
Now, the crucial warning. There are specific groups of people who absolutely must avoid potassium-based salt substitutes completely.
Okay, who are they? This sounds really important.
It is. This includes individuals with chronic kidney disease, also people taking certain types of potassium-sparing medications. Common examples are things like ACE inhibitors, ARBs, or spironolactone, often used for blood pressure or heart conditions, and also those with particular heart conditions or certain adrenal conditions.
And why? Why is it so important for those specific groups to stay clear? What's the risk?
For these individuals, their bodies might not be able to efficiently process or get rid of extra potassium. So using a potassium-based substitute could lead to dangerously high levels of potassium building up in their bloodstream. That condition is called hyperkalemia. And that can cause serious, even life-threatening complications, particularly affecting heart rhythm. So, bottom line, if you have any of these conditions, if you're on these types of medications, or if you're just unsure at all, it is absolutely vital to talk to your GP or your pharmacist before even thinking about using these products.
That is incredibly important advice.
Yeah.
Really crucial. Okay, so assuming someone can safely use them and they make the swap and try to reduce other sodium sources, how quickly might they actually see a difference, like on their blood pressure readings?
Yeah, it's generally not an instant thing. It's not like flipping a switch. If you're using a potassium-based salt substitute consistently, and you're also making real efforts to cut down other sources of sodium in your diet, you may start to see noticeable changes in your blood pressure readings after several weeks. This seems especially true if your blood pressure was elevated to begin with. It's more of a gradual effect that builds over time with those consistent dietary changes.
So it's definitely a supportive tool, like you said, but it's not a magic bullet, right? It doesn't replace the need for all the other healthy lifestyle choices.
Precisely. The research really underscores that. Long-term health gains truly come from a combination of habits working together. Prioritizing a diet rich in whole foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, that's foundational. And hey, many of those foods are naturally good sources of potassium anyway, which helps too. Think bananas, potatoes, leafy greens, beans. Plus, staying physically active, managing stress levels, getting enough sleep, these are all fundamental pillars for both heart and brain health. The salt swap is a potentially smart move, but it works best when it's supporting these broader essential habits.
Okay, so zooming out again, thinking about everything we've covered in this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's at the core takeaway from the research here?
I think the key takeaway, which is really powerfully supported by studies like that big salt trial, is that potassium-based salt substitutes offer a genuinely practical, low-cost strategy. For many people, particularly those who know they have a high salt intake or already have elevated blood pressure, this simple kitchen swap has the potential to meaningfully reduce blood pressure. And importantly, significantly lower the risk of major health events like stroke and other cardiovascular problems down the road.
And there's that surprising connection again, that something so incredibly common, so every day is salt, when you approach it thoughtfully and maybe swap it out, can have real measurable benefits, not just for your heart, but for your brain health too.
It really does highlight how powerful those small, informed adjustments to our daily habits can be when they accumulate over time.
Yeah, and I think the article's closing line really captures that idea beautifully. Sometimes better health really does begin with a pinch.
Absolutely. And if you kind of connect that thought to the bigger picture, it really encourages you, the listener, to consider what other small intentional changes could you make in your daily routine? Something as simple perhaps as rethinking the contents of your salt shaker. These things might not feel revolutionary day to day, but they really have the potential to add up and make a significant difference in your long-term health journey.
That's definitely something worth pondering. What other small, informed pinches could you make starting today?